So, here we are, episode 48 of La Brigata dei Geek Estinti, which is a way to say the dead geeks. And this is the first time we do it in English. And since it's the first time, we have huge guests here to honor us. We are going to talk about the Configuration Management Camp, but not also the Configuration Management Camp, but also the full the event, the topics, the trends, and whatever is around this crazy world of, can we say DevOps? Trick, you have the copyright on the word, so I don't know. We will talk about that, DevOps or whatever. So, introductions. I don't think many people need here introductions, but I will let you do your introductions in the way you want.
All right. I'll introduce Kris. So, Kris, there wasn't Kris, there wouldn't have been config management camp, right? So that's one thing. Kris, if there was a person who had open source tattooed on his arm, it would be Kris, but I don't know.
No, that's actually Stefan, but he has it.
Anyway, so he could probably do that. He also will solve all your DNS problems because everything's a freaking DNS problem. Is his blog. And he's been a companion along the route for anything DevOps, config management, open source for many years, right? How did I do, Kris? Did I leave something out?
Stefan has the actual penguin tattoo. I don't do tattoos, but apart from that, yeah, it's pretty good. Config Management Campus, the third conference I started, I guess. Anyhow, who should I pick? Should I pick Toshaan or should I pick James? Who's introducing Patrick, actually? James, you're pointing to Alessandro. That doesn't work.
Okay.
So let me take James. And now he's really scared. James is this really nice dude from Montreal, whom I met ages ago at the Sentinels Dojo, and was talking about how to use Vagrant. And we had a fun discussion about that. And then we figured out that he was building other stuff. And since then, or maybe longer, he's been talking about MGMT, probably the best name ever for a management tool. Stop shaking your head. He's been helping out with a bunch of events also. He's also helping out with Config Management Camp. And he's probably organizing the most active hackathon over the years. I mean, I think MGMT had the most contributions in number of Git commits on the Wednesday. I think that's a statistic you can claim, James.
We're doing our best. Was it Vagrant we were talking about, or was it Puppet?
It was Oh My Vagrant, and I don't want to have that discussion anymore. Yeah.
Well, so I guess I introduce Patrick. Alessandro, grazie per avermi
ospitato. No, that doesn't work, because if you do Patrick, then it's not going to be a circle. You need to do Toshaan.
Sorry, Toshaan. How's my Italian, Alessandro?
It was fine. Go on.
Okay. I need to practice, sorry.
Good.
Looking for invitations to Italy to hack on
Alessandro,
stuff.
Can you translate what he said? Because I didn't get that.
Grazie per avermi ospitato.
No, it's fine.
Thank you to the host, something? Okay.
Yeah,
thank you for your hospitality.
Thank you for having me, etc.
Guys, let's go to some interesting stuff. Let's not...
So Toshaan, who you cannot see because he magically never has his camera working, is a really dependable guy. He's very hardworking. And I met him through Config Management Camp. And between him and between him and Kris, this conference just really wouldn't happen. They pull through and work so hard. And it's the best conference I go to every year. And it's really a great place where I get to hear about so many different tools. And we have many hallway chats which basically make my year. So I'm very pleased to be on the call with him and all of you smart people.
So, hi Adam, we are doing a circle of introductions. Anyone introducing the next one? Toshaan, please do your choice.
So am I supposed to do Adam or Patrick?
Or Alessandro.
Or Alessandro, well.
No, I don't need... well, anyway.
Okay. I'll take Patrick because that's easier. So I presume most people know Patrick already. But he had the nickname of the Godfather of DevOps. He's the one who started DevOps and DevOps Days, together with Kris, of course. And he's been very active on promoting DevOps and the spirit of it, and has inspired a lot of people, I think, to adopt a lot of the theories that come with that. He lives in Ghent, so we do Config Management Camp in Ghent. well, technically he lives in the suburbs of Ghent, but yes, he lives close by. So I think
He's
that's
closer to Ghent than we do.
yes. I think that's more than enough
I would say
introduction.
he's the closest to Ghent of all of us, but given that I know that James is in Ghent, that also is a lie.
Currently still in Ghent, leaving tomorrow.
Leaving tomorrow, back to Canada.
Okay, so thanks for the introductions. Adam, you are left. I will introduce you, if you don't mind. Adam Jacob is the creator of Chef, the founder of System Initiative. He's a bright mind who has crazy ideas. And whenever you have conferences where you can see him presenting, you are sure that you are going to learn something interesting. But enough about the presentations and everything. Let's talk about the topics of the day. First of all, Cooperation Management Camp, State of the Union, Kris and Toshaan. How was quick numbers, figures about this edition? How it was, participants and...
We don't have official numbers because we don't have people who check in and see if there's people around. What I do know is that I think it was during Adam's talk or the talk before, we had a standing room only in the room that seats 326. There was over 100 people sitting in the overflow room, and there were still a lot of people grabbing coffee and talking to the sponsors at the booths. So at that point, we know that we were closing in on 500-600 people. It actually became more busy in the afternoon because we have pictures of people who were basically complaining that they had a FOSDEM feeling at Config Management Camp. There were a couple of rooms. I think the CI/CD room at some point was standing room only. We had to move the observability room to another track because it was basically in a way too small room. So from that point of view, I think we were really happy. The crowds are still coming to have the discussions we want them to have. More of 700 people registered. We always know that there's a bunch that aren't showing because, well, they're not showing if they're sick, and some of them just have last-minute things that don't work for them. After all, it is a free conference, so you know that there's less people who are actually coming. But yeah, I guess quite happy with the turnout.
Toshaan, do you have some other remarks or insights?
No, so mostly different to previous years. We actually see more people come in the afternoon, and more people show up actually later. Also, people who have come from FOSDEM are more tired, even though we do start later. Registered numbers were the same like last year. Actually, Wednesday we had more people than last year's. I think we reached the 150, which is something that we never have had before. And like Kris said, MGMT still has a lot of people who subscribed for the hackathon, but there were not that many. We have this problem on Wednesday, which we're trying to figure out on how to do better scheduling and better room engagement.
So,
But there was a lot of new people, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah. So that
Yeah,
was
we asked during the opening how many people were there for the very first time, and I think at that moment half of the room raised their hand, and it was really surprising that there was so many people coming for an event that has been running for 10 years for the very first time.
Well, not to forget that the overflow room, we have no idea how many people put up their hands there.
So this brings me to my first question. How do you feel like the configuration management years? Because the world of IT is not the same. 14 years ago, 10 years ago, whenever.
silence.
Who do you want to answer?
Oh,
Patrick wants to answer.
No. I'm
Anyone.
probably least away, so it's,
I mean, it's both dramatically different in that the specifics of like the shape of people's infrastructure 10 years ago, it was still you were majority on-prem probably for most people. That's probably not true now, or at least it's trending toward not true. It's probably more mixed, right? The stuff like Chef and Puppet and CF Engine were more like leading the edge. Docker, not a thing yet, right? Still a couple years away. Kubernetes for sure not a thing, right? And I think when you sort of and even the provisioning space, so infrastructure as code, Terraform, those things didn't exist yet. They were probably about to, right? Both Chef and Puppet had done a little bit of like cloud provisioning shenanigans, but sort of not gotten it right. I think now you see the that tooling landscape, like a lot of it was evolutionary. So it was like, how do we apply these ideas to new spaces, right? Terraform takes the ideas of Puppet and Chef and puts them into provisioning stuff in AWS, right? And then, Docker and Kubernetes and the rest of it sort of disrupted the commercial aspects of that space, which then didn't hurt them initially, but then eventually sort of caused those communities to sort of fracture a little. To me, the thing that's changed mostly is that when we came in initially, it did feel like it was a set of slightly disparate communities that had some overlap that were all hanging out. Now, it doesn't feel that way at all. Like, it feels much more like one large community of people who are all interested maybe in different aspects of the conversation, but they felt much more unified than they did 10 years ago to me. That may be because 10 years ago I was driving a wedge. Like, I don't think I was, but
Well, now you are doing a new edge, so
I hope not.
always
But
on
yeah.
edgy. I mean, in the good way. So,
Yeah.
I don't know if edge is a bad word.
I don't know if that's how it feels to the rest of you, but to me it feels like the folks who've been there for 10 years remain there because they genuinely love it and love each other. And 10 years ago, like, we were pretty sure we liked each other, but we were also kind of in armed camps. Do you know what I mean? We all had like really strong points of view about very niche-y issues where we still maybe have those points of view, but we have more that unites us than divides us. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's almost like there is an acceptance of saying, well, if that's your flavor, that's good, right? So
Yeah.
it's, if you want to do it by YAML files, that's good. If you want to do it differently, if you want to do it by code, anyway, that's how it feels. I think another transition, and it might not be that visible for the people attending config management camp, but the tooling and the languages definitely made an impact on organizations from a developer perspective. Things became more self-servicing, right? So they could use the languages. They could there was a policy around this, how it got deployed. So it also left over the years a little bit of the hardcore system administrator who has to kind of like bootstrap all the infrastructure, but there's an integration more on the application layer there as well.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's like another interesting riff on that is that, like, of the set of things that we were talking about at config management camp, only one of them I think you could call relatively pure config management, and that's management. Yeah, I think it's basically James. Like, everybody else there's some other riff that if you were looking at it in like a family tree and you're like, who's running down the family tree of pure configuration management, it's basically James. And like, that's interesting too. Whereas before there were at least 3 or 4 of us all on different spiders of the tree, and it's sort of collapsed where like the ones that we built are still around. There's not any real, James is building a new one, has been for a while. It's kind of the only new one that looks traditionally the same. I mean, System Initiative can do that kind of stuff, but it doesn't, right? It does, but you got to look at it differently than I think you would look at the sort of traditional config management. So like the shape of the landscape is really altered.
Yeah.
I guess I have to jump in now. But so for me, like config management, a lot of the kind of early stuff I learned, I got a lot of early lessons from Puppet, and that helped me kind of shape my worldview a lot. And I know they got it from CF Engine and so on. But in a lot of ways, some of those original core ideas I think are still correct. And I really think this is a nascent kind of community. And I really, really think that the tech world and companies and so on, they have kind of a short attention span. They're like, boop, config management. Oh, orchestration. Oh, provisioning. Oh, Bitcoin, Kubernetes, whatever, YAML. And I think that was what was always missing for me. I remember I was playing around with like early Bitcoin, but I also had MGMT stuff going on. And I was like, I don't want to just jump around. I want to pick one discipline and get really good at that and really like solve that problem, kind of like Pareto principle to 100%, because we have not done that, Even Puppet, I never thought Puppet was finished by far.
I don't think Luke thinks
he's finished either. Puppet, and they never wanted to put those in core. So I decided to sit down and write my tool the right way. What I think is the right way.
Yeah, totally. I can tell you for sure Chef was not finished.
That's very honest.
Do you think there is still space for this classical configuration management tool in the IT landscape now and in the next years?
So, I mean, I don't see myself as classical. I think that I look like some of the classical tools, but I think that I'm the future. And I look forward to proving that in the years that come.
Yeah, there's definitely space. The trick is that it has to be when the starting position is that everything that came before you was done by dummies and there was nothing to like know or learn, like that's bad because you're just doomed to reinvent some variation of why those things weren't great. Whereas like, like what James is doing, what I'm doing, like what I saw Patrick do too, talking about AI, like we weren't looking at those things without all of the benefit of that history and that knowledge and that time both together and it both physically together at Config Management Camp, but also intellectually together as people who explore the same field. And you're reacting to each other and to the advancements of the field and to what you think is interesting. And like, of course, it's only a matter of time before out of that soup comes more stuff that has impacts in the world, because it's really powerful things in this incredibly interesting niche of technology. And like, of course, there's going to be more interesting stuff that's going to come out of that. And, when we talk about it not as config management, it's the same way we talk about not having systems administrators. Like everybody who calls themselves a DevOps engineer and SRE is a fucking systems administrator. Platform engineers, that's all the shit I did for the first decade of my career. That's all I did. So like, whatever, call them whatever you want. Still configuration management in the end. It's all still Mark Burgess being 30 years ahead of the rest of us, and we're all just trying to catch up.
Any comments? What I usually say when people ask me, why are you still doing, if you think about the systems that you need to manage, think about the world and all the systems that live for more than, and that need to be managed. Those systems and I guess there will be such systems, maybe concentrated, hyperscalers, and more over. There is space for any kind of tool for different purpose.
I'm living a little bit more in a distance from you guys. You're like in the weeds all day, kind of on the tools. It strikes me whether I use tool A or B or C right now, like a syntax to get a cloud system up and running. Like I don't care too much. I've used probably all of them, and it's like, pro, con, syntax, sugar, blah blah blah. So I feel for a while there was a stagnation on whatever language, and we can debate whatever you like. But then, well, I personally was, not because you were doing now on the digital twins, but the concept of that got me reignited again. Okay, this brings down a new perspective, right?
Yes.
You're reasoning about that stuff, not just on like what are you going to do, or kind of like a plan or something, but you can bring in cost calculations. You can bring in like several other considerations, and then having this more in sync with your production, with your test environment, that I found very, it's like a new spark in there. Have you seen kind of like, maybe to round this off after Adam, I know you're excited, but have you seen other sparks that kind of like went on and it's like, okay, this is totally a new paradigm or something that makes it jump, besides having a new language, right? But anyway, that's how I feel it. I'm
with you.
Dishonest
I don't think it's dishonest. I think it's exactly right. I think we have no idea yet how to connect the creativity of LLMs to the finite domain that is configuration. There's like fun and terrifying experiments. We have no idea what that actually would look like in a way that feels safe and like useful to people. That doesn't mean it's not going to be useful or safe. I think it probably will become useful and it will become safe, but we don't know what that is. That's obviously like an interesting spark. I think the idea of like a universal configuration graph, which Puppet really wanted to have, like if they were here, like I don't remember when I first heard him tell me that's what he was building, but it was a long fucking time ago, very early days. That idea, I think, has found new life again in different forms. You see it in Q. System Initiative has one, right? I think you'll see more and more of that. I think the declarative imperative thing, in the same way that we all fell into like convergent systems, and then Docker punched us all in the face with a congruent one and was like, hey, actually, what's better is congruent system builds, which we always knew was true, but we had like, as a community, we'd like shouted down the people who gave us that idea, and we were like, you're dummies, convergence forever. And I think you're going to see a similar thing with the declarative model, period. Like, I watched a demo earlier today from the System Initiative team. We can send a signal to the services to change their trace level. And so they just added an action in System Initiative to use the AWS session manager to send a signal distributed across the deployment in production so they could tweak the trace levels of the application. And they did it in like 40 lines of JavaScript code. That doesn't work in a declarative way. right? Like, what would you do? I guess you could write a declaration that says the log level should be X or the trace level should be X. But like, all you care is that it happened. You care that it got tracked. You care about the side effect. You care about the next thing. So like, I think there's a lot, not just in System Initiative, but like in general. You look at like what James is building. Nobody's ever built a system that reacts at the speed that James's does. Like, those loops were so much slower. What can you build on a system that reacts at the speed that James's system reacts? We have no idea, right? So interesting. There's a ton of really interesting sparks.
I guess I'll follow Adam again. He's my new marketing director, basically. Maybe one day my business partner. We'll see. But I'll say on new tools and things. So when Adam last year, a year ago, basically gave his first system init talk, I think it might have actually been the first one ever, right, Adam?
Yeah, look, they've only given 2.
Yeah, okay, there we go. And you know what? I mean, I kind of love this stuff because for me, as a guy who kind of thinks about, European butter, olive oil, and config management, a new tool, right? It's like the most exciting thing. So every time I see a new tool, whether it was Adam's thing, whether it was Wing, whether it was Qlang, whatever, I'm always like excited to dive in and kind of see deeply what he's doing. And at least for Adam's case, the first thing that like shocked me when I saw his talk and demo last year was like the GUI aspect of it. And when I saw that, in kind of honesty, and I mean this in a nice way, I said, "Oh my God, a GUI!" Like, I hate GUIs because I personally am a terminal kind of guy.
You love them. You're a terminal person. Me too.
Yeah, and then it simultaneously, the second thought was like, "Holy shit, he's gonna sell so much to all the customers that love GUIs." And so
I'm gonna sell it to you too.
I love seeing new tools.
I'm gonna sell it to you too. Just wait.
I got no money.
I'll sell it to your heart.
But yeah, it seems like every new tool is probably trying to get the new paradigm across, right? So we were kind of like the way of thinking that changed, and whether that's the UI or other stuff. So
I don't think you have a choice at this point, because to your point from earlier, it's fucking boring. Like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna launch a new Pulumi competitor because you prefer Python? Like, Pulumi already does Python. It's probably fine. Like, you're gonna what like another configuration management system that works roughly the same way Puppet and Chef and CF Engine 3 worked. Like, okay, I mean, you could, but do we need one? Not really. Not really. It's not that interesting, right? Like, what's left to do right now is interesting shit. There's nothing. All the like, if it's not interesting, why? Like, what's the point? We covered a lot of ground that has now become pretty tried and true. So if you're not doing something interesting, that's why I think now is so interesting as a moment in our movement, because like it did have a little dark night of the soul, I think, where it was like, is it still a thing? Should it still be a thing? And like, you're starting to see it be like, well, yeah, it definitely is still a thing, because look at all this interesting stuff that's starting to happen. But it takes a minute, because you have to work hard to do better than what we did. We did a good job. So like, it's not trivial to make something better,
Do we see any progress? Like one gap, like I see many gaps. Like, one is the deployment and the reactionary thing with observability, but that might be, kind of the feedback loop that, MGMT is looking at. The other one is, let me give the example. I'm a serverless developer. I need my function to be deployed. I can't test everything locally. I have this complex thing, although it's deploying the stuff, but there is a connection missing on my debug level kind of tracing and kind of fast feedback loop. So anything happening there in that region?
Did you see Wing? Did you see the Wing talk?
Yeah, but then I had a hard time connecting the abstract layer, maybe like because it uses abstract constructs and not the constructs that I'm used to thinking. But I can get that's probably where it's heading. Yeah.
Well, it's certainly an attempt to head there.
Yeah.
So whether they're getting it or not, it's a different question. but certainly, I think if Elon was here, he'd say that's what he was trying to do, right?
Yeah. So I talked to him, and I love that he's trying a new kind of way of this. In some ways, it's cloud provisioning again, like Terraform, but that he bundles in that kind of, I guess it's Wing script, TypeScript-esque thing. But I think that I also want to see more, like he's doing the cloud provisioning side, but not the machine itself provisioning and setup and config management. So I wonder if it's because it's too hard to do both. Like, why didn't Terraform do both? Like, I don't know.
I think because for him I think for him, it's actually that the cloud is the operating system that he's programming to.
Yeah.
So he like more on the serverless end, like the idea that you would have to configure a server directly is antithetical because he doesn't want to think about it at that level.
Do you think a lot of people is that enough for most customers?
No.
Okay.
It feels a little bit like
I
your
don't know.
Roku. You don't have to know what the database is. Kind of.
I mean,
style, but
yeah, and this is what's sort of happening with serverless in general. Like
Yeah.
the serverless frameworks, like when it gets complicated, it's too complicated. So it's great until it's not. And he's going to lower the level of complexity of that. And we don't know if you make it easier to build better architectures. So if you remove the friction that comes with higher scale, more complicated serverless architectures, could they build bigger, more complex applications in that style and it would thrive? It's an interesting bet. Like if you ask the teams that use serverless why they fail because it gets too complicated. And then the management of the serverless platform starts to overwhelm the productivity of using serverless in the first place. So if he can return that productivity count to you, then suddenly the latent demand on that architecture might go up, at which point you start to see some more complicated things that you couldn't have seen or couldn't have built before because the framework's got in your way. Like that could pay off. Like that's a legitimate bet that could work. I'm not sure if it will, but it could. And it's really interesting to see someone try. And the simulator aspect of it, back to digital twins, like that's like he's essentially building a digital twin for the cloud level abstractions and then letting you interact with it in a simulator to replace the integrated testing suite, which is super cool. And an interesting idea that, I don't think Patrick had talked to Elad. I hadn't talked to Elad, right? But like I just built a whole fucking crazy simulator. Patrick spent years thinking about simulators, right?
Not years, but
months.
I found it interesting just as a modeling. I came from actually the virtual game engines, right? So and they're doing the plans and the industrial things and syncing their knowledge. So that was my angle. Yeah, another thing that like never really took off, but maybe was I always expected that the cloud provisioning tooling, or let's call it like the system config management, that somehow it would extend towards
being cloud agnostic.
No, services. Like why? I know you can, but I'm not seeing it pick up. Like put a Google mail server or a domain into a certain config, right? Or my MailChimp or anything, like any third-party service. It seems that those are still on the clickety-click, while they're like somehow legacy of that's hard to maintain as a config. But I haven't seen it picked up. You see, like here and there, everybody's like trying, but nobody's picking the domain or like the problem.
Most of those APIs aren't very stable. So trying to do that is mostly a problem of let's take the domains. So depending on which registrar you use, you have different APIs. The APIs are not stable for those registrars within versions, so it becomes very difficult. Yes, I know, that's why I took domains. That's the reason why I've seen a lot of people try to do that. And you have a few open source projects which have actually tried to do that, but they can't maintain it because of the instability of the API. And that's something I think the cloud providers have done much better, like GCP and AWS. Their APIs are at least slightly more stable, that you can manage them.
Right. They might be garbage, but they're not changing garbage.
Exactly. and that's a big problem. Changing garbage is something that's very difficult to maintain from an open source community perspective. People get excited, make it, and then the vendor changes it. Sometimes will even give some advance notice if you are extremely lucky. But most of the time it will break and your users will get fed up and they run away. And getting them back is difficult.
But I get that that's for consumer services, but for enterprise service, again, I don't know.
Yeah, I've seen some of this in Terraform, and maybe Pulumi, but I don't think it's caught on the way that you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly think a lot of it is that the drift doesn't happen in the same way. So I had this argument at the very beginning of configuration management, as a thing that you would talk about at config management camp with Theo Schlossnagel. Do you guys remember Theo? Theo's a legend. Let's call Theo in the top. Theo's easy in the top 20 individual practitioners at this craft of all time.
Definitely.
If you were Hall of Fame in him, I think personally he's top 5. So like I put him on the Mount Rushmore, but like you do you. Anyway, he's incredible. And at the time, like Jenkins was everywhere. Everybody was setting up Jenkins clusters, and everybody was working really hard to automate to let you like set up your Jenkins cluster as code. And I remember him and I showed him how to do it with Chef, and he was like, "This is fucking dumb." You know, he was like, "You know what I can do? I can click in this web UI, and then the job runs 10,000 times, and I don't want it to change. And if I do want it to change, I could just go over there and click it and change the little shell script and hit save, and then it's done. And I don't have to think about it anymore for 10,000 more times." And we'd all be like, "Well, but what if you destroyed the Jenkins cluster? And what if the blah, blah happens?" And he was like, "Well, I'm not an idiot. So I do my best not to delete the continuous integration infrastructure, and I take backups of the database, and I restore it like any other piece of software because I'm not a chump." And like he just like harangued me for like an hour and a half about what a dummy I was. And I think there's something to his point that like when you look at like Google domains, how often do you monkey around with your domain? Like not that. Well, Kris is like, but you always have DNS problems. This is like an ongoing, right? If you did that less, it would be more stable.
But you keep adding on new features, new services, and they all need DNS. And then the whole mail ecosystem is completely changed. So everything SPF and DKIM and all that stuff, you need DNS. I mean, it's definitely not something you touch once and don't ignore for a year. You keep on having to maintain it. I mean,
I barely had to maintain barely.
Yeah, but I love your analogy.
I mean, yeah, okay. No, I see different things. Like you need to keep your DNS up to date. It's not something that's finished.
If it's not in a Git repository, it doesn't exist. So the point and click thing, it's good for some things, but for some other things, I don't know. No?
I don't know. Sure smells like it existed for Theo. Sure seems like it exists for everybody that does enterprise integrations, making with the clicky. I'm not saying that it's bad to do it the other way, but if we're trying to figure out why it didn't happen, to Patrick's point, it didn't happen because fundamentally it wasn't that big of a problem. Like it just wasn't that painful. And we're like, oh, it's awful I have to do this. But like, and it is the one time a year you got to do it. The like once every decade you set it up and you're like, yeah, that was bad. But like, I got a bunch of Zapier rules that do a bunch of automation and like, it's fine. Like you clicked through it. It's fine. If the account went away, I couldn't recreate them. That's true.
I think
we have the mainframe people who are now finally given their first presentation at Config Management Camp, and we had them actually adopt a lot of the configuration management tools.
Yeah.
We have, these are people who traditionally are very slow in moving. The slowest movers are, of course, IBMI, and even they are moving to configuration management. Okay, they're about 25, 30 years late, but they still are moving towards that. So the attitude of many of these enterprise customers who previously would have liked clickety-clack and GUIs is moving towards different. Their moving is, of course, extremely slow. Takes them typically 50 years to catch up, but at least there's some movement there. So I think
given that we're running in circles, it's going to take us 2 more circles before they catch up.
Yes. And they have then the advantage of having tooling that is more stable and more mature, because I mean, most of us have seen a lot of the changes in configuration management. They will come in at a point where it's much more stable and mature, and maybe that will be beneficial to them.
So you're saying I have 10 years to get AIX builds ready?
Yes.
Yes.
So Adam's comment is kind of a nice one. Makes me think about like the design of TCP/IP, because the problem with TCP/IP, well, one problem with TCP/IP is the IP packet and the TCP packet are linked in a one-to-one mapping. So you can't like have the TCP connection move to a different IP without killing it. And like this is like how we used to build our infrastructure. Like we had the database server and the web server, and it was like just fix. You set it up once and it's done. But I don't think that our future infrastructure and even our current infrastructure is modeled that way. Like we express these dynamic patterns as like individual tools, like auto scaling and failover and things like that. But like for me, the whole realization that we want to model time became then a question of how do we model time instead of these static systems. And that's why I built my language the way I did. And I'm kind of excited to hopefully become a mature tool where we can start throwing out these one-of tools that just manage one aspect of time. So like the autoscalers, the cluster management tools like RG Manager from the old days, like all these one-ofs, we need to throw them out and just replace all of that with just glue code in something. That way, because every time we have a different tool, the data interfaces between each tool become harder to manage. You can't model the whole system as a whole. You can't type check the whole system as a whole. And as our infrastructures invariably become more complex, off by one errors and type errors could take out a whole data center, a whole zone or whatever. So this is what I'm working towards.
I mean, to be contrarian for a minute, I know we say that we've moved to a world where everything is like more ephemeral and portable. In reality, that's not what's happening. Even in a world where we're doing it that way, like it's frequently that way because the tooling forces it. So I had this conversation a couple of times at Config Management Camp with people where they were like, well, the way we deploy is we start with building a new Kubernetes cluster, and then we move all the data into that cluster, and then we deprecate the old cluster. And you're like, why is that the way you're doing it? And they're like, well, because Kubernetes doesn't upgrade in place very well. And we have all this tooling that knows how to reconcile. And so we just keep throwing more and more reconciliation loops at the problem until we're done. We're not actually looking at that problem in any kind of, through any lens of rational thought. If you were rationally drawing it out, if we removed the technology you had already chosen and we said, just sit down with a piece of paper, draw me the structure. No, that is because you wouldn't do it. It would take forever for you to draw that architecture. And when you drew it, your friends would laugh at you. They'd be like, that's insane. Like every time you want to deploy a new version of the thing, you're going to destroy the backplane. And you're like, yeah, good hygiene, huh? You'd be like, no, like it's awful. And like, so I think that we sort of walked ourselves into this box where we were like, hey, because these ideas were good, declarative reconciliation loops. What's Kubernetes except Puppet and Chef where they move the reconciliation loop inside the thing. We took the manifest in, reconciliation loop runs and go, does the thing that needs to do on the pooters. Like it's essentially the same pattern that we were running in data centers before it existed. And I'm not saying it's not cool or useful, but is it the final state of how we actually want these systems to work, or even a pattern that you want to embrace? For how long? I don't know. Like I'd much rather see it written James's way, for example. Like that's a much more interesting bet to me, because the shape of the underlying systems changes the shape of what you can build on top of them. This is why so many Kubernetes abstractions fail to be abstractions at all, right? They just completely leak what it is underneath them because the interface itself is so high level. Anyway, there's a whole untapped interesting vein in that assumption that says that those architectures were good or even to be desired. I'm not sure that they are. I used to be sure that they are, but I've changed my mind over the years.
And all this complexity, which we try to hide under easy tools on the surface. Sometimes, when you think about the abstractions, for example, we were mentioning an interface to DNS, an interface. At the end, there are some real tools, some APIs, some things that have to work, sometimes don't work as expected, sometimes break, and so on. I wonder if adding all these layers, which simplify things for the end user, make all the stuff behind more and more complex, or if the complexities is somehow inherent with the growing of the infrastructure world. I mean, sometimes when I see what some tools try to do, looks like magic, no?
Mm-hmm.
And is that magic ever going to work in the real world out of labs or easy pre-made?
I think the danger is over-promising with your abstraction, right? Abstracting, I wouldn't say is a bad pattern per se, because it allows you to think, and we don't think about the machine learning, the machine assembler stuff and stuff like that. Sorry, I got like my AI.
Yeah.
And those kind of abstractions. So it does make sense then. When I'm on the cloud, I just use the service, okay, whether that's DNS or something else. I don't need to look in there, and it does the job, right? We're set like, okay, somebody else taking care of this part. I can do my job. I have redundancy. I I can kind of do the expression. So I think, what we learned over the years of the abstractions is that when it fails, then you don't have the insights, or you're not prepared anymore. And there's the whole thing about, okay, if I think it was John Ospo who said, like, okay, you have your whole CI/CD pipeline working, right? Like, what if you haven't trained how it works to anybody? That would be a mess. So we need to compensate somehow that we are prepared for a failure, that we still understand that there's still documentation, but we can't escape this complexity of the abstraction when it fails. Like I with my car, when it fails, I go to the garage and they have the tools, and that's fine. I don't need all the tools at my garage, but I do think it allows us to go faster in certain areas because it's taken care of. Whether that's the most efficient way, right? If under the hood it spins up like 7 Kubernetes clusters to just make sure that I can do the hello world, probably not like the most efficient way. But we don't care because we don't see, and somebody else taking care of that. And if that's a good price and that works for me, that's fine. So it's also a part of that collaboration of a trust with the party that you're going for, whether they're transparent in their retrospectives, they tell you what's going on, they tell you the changes, something we also mentioned. So that's kind of another way of dealing with the complexity of abstraction. But
I mean, you can't remove it. There is a level of inherent complexity, right? So like the system is as complex as it is, and there is an irreducible level of it. I think the danger of abstractions, if there is one, to Patrick's point, they're not dangerous in and of themselves, is that they can't be pierced easily by design. Like when we talk about abstractions in computer science, like we're intentionally usually making those abstractions not pierceable. And usually some of the behavior of what's underneath leaks, which is why we call them, we say all abstractions are leaky to some degree. That's why. So another Mark Burgess thing that's underexplored is this notion of like a semantic layer, that there's you can think of it as how the world works. Like, we're all having this conversation. Most of us are sitting at desks. We don't talk about the atoms that make the desk a desk, even though there's definitely a semantic layer of the world where the atoms and molecules that make up the desk are true. That's a true thing. But instead we just call it a desk because it's a lot easier to operate at that level of semantics than at the lower level of semantics. And we haven't really embraced that idea enough to think about how do you build systems that scale semantically as opposed to through abstraction, right? So how do we make it so, Patrick's car analogy is a perfect one. Like Patrick gets to drive the car. He doesn't need a lower level of semantic abstraction to understand all the parts of the car. The mechanic does. The mechanic cares, when a car that's hard to work on comes in, he's like, ugh, I hate these fucking cars because they messed up the low level semantic abstraction of the car needs to be worked on. And in general, what we tend to do in infrastructure, especially people who haven't worked in infrastructure or built tools in infrastructure for a long time, they tend to really just be like, we'll abstract all of this away. It's all useless muck. None of it matters. Just only give them the thing they need and nothing more. And it never works because that lower layer of semantic abstraction is necessary. We have it because sometimes you need it. And so that question of how do you scale semantically, I think is an untapped vein of thinking about systems design.
And there's also the level of standardization. So I remember we went to the cloud, everyone was like, oh yeah, I can't have access to my kernel anymore. And you remember all the tweakings we're doing? You don't need. Like, oh, my networking, my VLANs. You don't need, right? So you're standardized with the interface. It's good enough. It works for you. Like that constant drive to kind of fiddle under the hood and to understand it. There's the irony is if I'm very close to the technology as a person, it seems that I care about all the knobs. If I'm buying a computer, I'm looking up all the specs I need to know. And then when it's a car, I'm like, color, drive, all good. Like I can't look. And so I don't need it, but it's because I care about, and I know somehow it feels we're involved that we need to know, but we don't. And that's kind of also standardization.
Until you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you do, and it's actually even worse.
Go ahead, Kris.
Take the car analogy. I mean, we're getting to a point where cars can drive themselves up to a certain level, but at some point they cannot. And then there's young people who are going to not even be able to drive a shift gear because they've never learned, and they're going to expect cars to drive and do things completely autonomously while they don't. They're going to have a crash at some point because something happened that wasn't. They're going to go through a red light, and they're not even going to realize that the car should have stopped, and they won't understand that, well, it's red. Why didn't the car stop? Because they never learned. And that is what we're seeing now with new technology too. People spinning up cube clusters and they have no clue that there's the disk underneath somewhere that are going to flood, and they're going to go, what? I don't have infinite disk space. And we still need to set those rules. And Patrick pointed to observability and feedback loops, and all of that is still not there. We still need to find ways to tell people like, hey, remember backups? They're not magic. Remember monitoring? You need to turn this on, and you need to somehow configure this. And those tools still, the cars have all the blinkers, the cars have all the things, because it's a fixed set of things. But even there, it's not solved yet. So I think we have a lot of work to do still.
You're all delights, but I gotta go. Thank you for letting me hop in and then hop back out again.
Thank you, Adam. Anytime you want to join us,
I'm not even gonna lie. I kind of miss you.
It's in Italian.
I'll have to learn Italian first, but I do actually miss all of you. You're all
English episodes. I mean, unless you want.
Adam, it's been a week and you already miss us.
I do already miss you. Are you kidding? We're like, most of the time when I start to talk like this, people are like, which maybe is how you guys feel too. God, that would be awful. But like,
Party in Montreal.
Right? Exactly. All right.
Go for it. You're in Ghent.
Yeah.
Well, tomorrow, party in Montreal. Tomorrow. Or in a week or a month, you're all invited.
Yeah. Or come to Marin. It's very sunny. All right. Bye.
All right. Thanks, Adam.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so by the way, thanks to David, Francesco, and Gary, who are sending messages in the chat, which are quite useful and interesting. So they are somehow participating to the discussion.
How can we see the chat?
You have to go on YouTube.
Okay.
And
If
David
they
was
post something-
underlying this thing. Are in some way software as a service systems, semantic layers themselves. So you don't have to care about how they work. The interface is that one until it breaks. That's also the point, because when the interface breaks or when the interaction with interface breaks, you have to start to dig, is when you have to learn. The big elephant in the room, Patrick, I know that you are jumping full feet in your AI world. AI and operations. Let's talk about these. Not the operations of the AI for the moment, which is also an interesting topic, but AI and operations. So this whole idea and concept, which I guess everybody is dreaming of, about using AI to handle operations in some way, or to help us, pair us. How do you see the thing? How evolve and how the things are now?
Yeah, I think there's so we had a few things. We had AI ops, which was basically looking at statistics for observability and trying to deduce what is the next thing or trend that we'd be looking for. Then we had ML ops for training the models. We had LLM ops for training large language models. And then now we're kind of looking into Gen AI and DevOps, kind of with the LLMs, how they can help each other. There's the part where, in general, finding information can get a lot easier and a lot more in context. So if we feed it our documentation, if we feed it our wiki, if we feed like our run books, in a way, when we need it, it will surface quite easily. That's kind of mixing our own data with the large language model. That's whether that's your documentation, wherever, that's your business use case. It's something we can do, right, with the new technology. Is Patrick saying all of this, or is the AI holding him hostage? Okay, so I'm gonna blink, but I'm notorious for having like very small eyes, so you might not be able to see it. Anyway, so apart from the documentation, people have been looking into, of course, generate me code, and that has been trial and error, and we're trying to make this in a better way and creating tests. We're not there yet, but it is just people are trying to get better at this, or at least reduce the burden of us creating those tests, improving the code. And then there's the whole thing about, but what if we can delegate this to an agent that just listens what you're doing, what somebody else is doing, and acts on our behalf? So in coding, that could be, instead of just saying, how do I generate a web page with the newest framework, just start coding me some of the file. What I've said is, in order of maturity. The first thing is finding documentation that's kind of like a solved problem. Generating code, we know how to do it. We just need a lot more training in there. But the whole further trusting it, we're not there yet. So I'm trying to see, my interested to see where the boundary is. Like how do we get better? How can we make sure that when it's assisting us, and in what cases we can automate some of those areas. And interesting enough, the whole semantic thing comes up there as well, because you express what you want, you describe what the config file is doing, and it makes a link on the semantic level. So there's kind of a hope that this will further evolve as the models get better trained in a certain way. I mentioned in my talk that, like, will I trust it currently? No, but it definitely speeds certain areas up on what we can do with that. And that could be during, the canonical example I keep hearing, there's an on-call situation. Okay, finding the right documentation is important. I want to do this as fast as possible. I want to find out what has changed. I want to see this digested, but I also want somebody to look up what's the SLA of this customer, who is impacted. So all that information could easily get found and digested for me, better informed decisions while I'm fixing the call. So that can definitely help there. Fixing things, certain known cases, probably yes. And then it's a matter of, okay, how do we go further? But I notice it's like, I personally don't dismiss this as it's the next technology and it's a hype. I think, more, I'm just trying to understand its limits right now. And it's almost like
you still say you hope to get there.
Well, the thing is, because the limits are moving almost every day right now. So, and then we'll see where it ends. Models that we were a year ago not able to run unless we're in a big data center are currently running on our laptop with similar quality and results. That's a huge impact. And we now can run some of that stuff on our phones. So I'm just saying it goes so fast and nobody really knows where it's ending. Also, the emergent behavior of that stuff, it's so incredible. Like, if I say do a summarization, you say, oh yeah, okay, that's a summarization. But then if I give it hints, it all of a sudden it becomes like I don't need to program anymore. It becomes like it's exercising behavior that otherwise would have been very hard to build. And there's a whole scrutiny we can work on creating better tests and observability to make sure that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot, and which is something I've been advocating as well, that we're not just saying, YOLO, let's run this script on the machine. So, but we can definitely get better and the irony is, I always say that we've been very good at this chaotic thing, and we're also dealing with things in production. But it is important to still have a fail-safe environment on when you use that stuff. So it doesn't go away, but it can go a lot faster and digest information just a lot faster than we do, and that can help us. But I leave you with the cliffhanger here because I have to go. But I will watch the recording and then I'll watch the smart people from you reacting to me in a rant like it's not there yet.
You drop the AI bomb, go.
Yeah.
Okay, no problem.
All right.
Thank you, Patrick, as well for being here. So now that we are left here, some questions for back to configuration management camp, which since we are here, the organizers, maybe let's take the occasion to talk about that a bit more. First of all, next year, same place, same thing, same. Do you want to do?
Almost. It's happening at Kris's house next year instead of the university.
What?
James, sorry, what did you say?
I thought we're doing it at your house instead of the university next year.
Alessandro's place.
Yeah, Alessandro's
my place.
That's what I meant.
But I don't have the organization skills of Toshaan and Kris. No, really. There are some plans. You were mentioning maybe trying to do something for the third day.
We haven't got our retrospective yet, so
Yeah,
that's scheduled for Thursday.
Yeah, we
Probably,
will do the retrospect and see. We'll try to announce some dates a little bit sooner and move forward a little bit quicker on things. But for now,
but you might also have heard that Patrick just left. But we're also planning something else in Belgium for this year, and we're pretty much going to be busy with that till somewhere half September, and then we're going to pick up config management camp again, I guess. I mean, maybe we announce a date before, maybe we decide on going, but I mean, there's this other thing which we've been doing for 15 years that is going to happen in Belgium this year.
Well, we'll run both next to each other. I mean, from an organizational point of view. But yeah, the main focus will be the other event till September, and then we will focus again on config management camp. But it should be the same place, same time.
Can you share more details on this event?
4th and 5th of September. Location Belgium. Look at Kris's background, and you should know where the location is.
Well, the location, my background is the location where only a select audience will be. I mean, I don't want to
I'm just talking about the
but that's where the organizer day will be. But to really tell you, because I'd say Alessandro is not following what we're talking about. We are planning the 15th anniversary party of DevOps Days. I mean, it's a pity Patrick just left, but it's been 15 years since we did the very first DevOps Days in Ghent. And we're working on getting that rolling for the first week of September. If you're asking, is config management camp going to run again? It's like, yeah, well, let's talk again after we did 15th year anniversary of DevOps Days, and then we'll talk about config management camp in full. I mean,
so
we always have
where in
our
Ghent
head.
as well, the DevOps Days.
It's going to be in Belgium. Nobody ever said it was in Ghent.
Okay, no, because I mean, I remember the 10th edition was in Ghent, no, the 10th anniversary.
Yeah, but we have a problem with the venue of the 10th edition. Can I share an image here? Yeah, probably. Damn. So the current location of the 10th year anniversary, if you
cannot be
physically go there, it says 404, but in Dutch. It basically says venue not found. So we need to find something else.
So we will see. I guess we will discover this.
We'll announce it in a couple of days. There's actually
anyone who wants to know early, I'm selling the secret location for 100 euros. Just message me.
James is horribly looking for money to build MGMT, even selling the location for 100 euros. Yeah,
not that desperate.
So you've been having dinner with all of us last couple of weeks, and now you're still.
It's pretty impressive that it's 15 years since Kris and family and everyone kicked this off. I mean, he's created the franchise that's one of the biggest tech franchises in the world, and there's really not a company in the world that's doing serious computing that has not at least co-opted the word DevOps for a huge portion of their titles. You just have to be under a rock to not know what Kris and Patrick and everyone have built.
Kris, one day we will do the DevOps versus platform engineering edition of our Brigata dei Geek Estinti, where I will invite you.
We already had that.
Adam already explained that. Yeah,
it's like the only thing I didn't comment on, it's like, what do you call people who do this job? And I think on my blog post ages ago, I wrote a blog post, DevOps is not the job title. And somebody questioned, like, so what do we call these people? And I think it was Andrew Clay Schaefer who responded, they're being good at their job. And that is what it's about. We've been building platforms for ages. Depending on the size of the organization, you build a dedicated platform team or you have cross-functional teams. There's nothing new into doing that. It's still the same job, building things that other people can consume, whether it's an external team, whether it's an internal team, whether you're running a software as a service observability platform, or whether you're building shopping carts. I mean, you're building things that other people consume, and you need to collaborate. And if that's platform engineering, is that system administration, there's people who keep the lights on, there's people who write the functionality. Those need to work together, and it doesn't matter what you call it.
Okay, so I won't invite you. You already gave me.
Yeah, you can invite me if there's people who want to discuss this. That's a lot of us think of it like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. But there is one thing actually about the DevOps engineer job title, which is always fascinating, because it's true that everybody says it's not a job title. It's also true that people use it as a job title, and in some way it identifies a kind of person which does those things and knows about those things. no? The automation, infrastructure as code, all these kind of different elements of let's say the landscape. And finally, I asked Jenkins some time ago about his own opinion about the job title of DevOps engineering. He said, why not? It somehow identifies a person who knows to do these kind of things. But I guess here it's a matter of opinions.
It's a matter of opinions in a way that the thing you described, if somebody actually uses that description, that's fine. But what we had in the initial days and what we still have now is that people put different expectations to that job title. They want a Java engineer who also does system administration. They want a system engineer who also is capable of debugging stack traces. And while there's people out there that know that and that are capable of doing that, that is not the default. What is a DevOps engineer when you look for it? Are you looking for a developer who does the operational part, or are you looking for somebody who has a broad scale of experience and does automation? It's not clear. The word creates often more confusion than clarity. And the other part that you sometimes have is that you have a bunch of DevOps engineers and you put them in a DevOps team, and the DevOps team sit between the delivery team and the platform team, because those organizations still have also or freshly created a platform team, and the developers and the QA team. And what they did is they created a new silo. One of the things I have done a lot when I was doing transformations is like, let's not talk about DevOps. Let's not even call it DevOps. Let's call it engineering 2.0. Let's call it fast delivery, and get organizations to get a common word, a common set of values that they want to achieve. And maybe that means that they're doing literally what some other company calls DevOps. But the moment they say, we're going to do DevOps, they're going to get confused about what the industry think it is about. And they're going to do Ops Dev and Oops Dev mostly, or Dev Oops. Yeah, James is writing messages. There is still no, this is the role of a DevOps engineer. Because you'll end up with organizations where the DevOps engineer is a person in charge of the CI platform. And you end up with organizations where it is the senior Java developer who writes a bit of tests, and there's no clarity. So if you start hiring for that role, I'd rather have somebody who's hiring for an SRE or a platform engineer, because that's much more clear to describe what the organization is actually looking for than when they're looking for a DevOps engineer. It has improved over the years. It's absolutely better than before, but it's still not clear.
But that's for all titles. I mean, it's the same with full stack developer. I mean, full stack developer.
Full stack developer, that's absolutely clear. That's somebody who does Mongo, Ember.js, and Node. It's a mean developer, and that's all they know because they have no clue what the full stack is about.
Exactly. So a full stack developer, a DevOps engineer, a SRE, depends on the context. And typically, a DevOps engineer would not be a good title, because you, in the real spirit, you would want to have someone who has some development and some operations, or who can switch between the two contexts. And that's not something that most people can do. That's the same problem, but that just naming, creating more silos is a more problematic issue, whereby you have DevOps engineers talking to each other over different silos, and then you start wondering, what are they trying to achieve here?
Still, the point is that this cloud of meanings, which is somehow DevOps involves, definitely doesn't help in having a fixed idea of what it is. No? And I guess this is the struggle since the beginnings in terms of explaining what is. And the same reason that if you ask the same questions to different people, you get different answers, semantic cloud, so to say, when DevOps. Okay, before we leave and we close, since also James has to leave and go to sleep, any final thoughts? Any idea of things that you want to communicate and share with the world?
So Platform Camp Italy.
Platform Camp. We will think about that. Why not?
In the summer.
No, it could be spring, could be fall, but
spring or fall.
Kris,
don't burn us, huh? In
if
Italy
you
in the
remember
summer.
the DevOps days in Italy, you have to recognize that the best food ever was the best, most elegant location and that time. No, I'm joking about that time because there was this. You remember, Kris? No, the dress
I
code.
remember. We were all in San Francisco. I think we were all at Puppet Conf. And suddenly somebody sends a mail like, hey, there's a dress code at the venue. And I think there were people who were already traveling. They were coming straight from, I was a PuppetConf, I guess. They were coming straight from PuppetConf to Italy. And they were basically, the only thing they packed were shorts and t-shirts. And then they said, there's the dress code. And we're like, no way, there's 300 geeks coming. What are you going to get a dress code? So we solved it eventually.
We managed to break the rules anyway. So
yeah. We had some weird looks by the staff, but it was fun. The food was great, definitely.
Okay, so guys, thank you for your participations this evening. Thanks also, I see the last message from David. The entire industry is afflicted by folks trying to name things they don't understand with words they don't mean that don't mean anything. Yeah, David. And also Gary, who says many job sites nowadays looks to hire an entire IT department for rather than a single.
Exactly. They want the dev and the ops and everything together.
And everything. So do everything.
And they have only budgets for one person.
Yeah, and it must be as paid as a junior, but be expert in everything.
Absolutely.
So if anyone out there listening is wanting to contribute to MGMT or be an early customer, we have some pre-built use cases and cheap plug, but search MGMT config, ping me, and I have some software to send you. And grazie per avermi ospitato, è stato fantastico parlare con te. Okay. I hope my accent's not so bad.
Thank you for the effort, James. So, see you next time. All the best, and thank you everybody for.
Thank you, Alessandro.
Thank you.